to New York.
Well, thank
you're
you
coming
so
through.
much.
In from which part of Europe do you hang your hat?
I live in Austria.
In Austria,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, very good. I'm glad we could put it together after all these years being in touch on the internet.
Yes, yes.
And
it's a
in
pleasure.
the audience, welcome very, very much. The guest is Heather Wokusch. She's a blogger, and she's a progressive blogger and educator. She's also a political activist, and she's also written a book that had very good standing on a number of the things to keep track of it, called the Progressives Handbook, Get the Facts and Make a Difference, which is a major book. It gives the clue that you are of a progressive persuasion. She's based mostly these days in Europe. We're going to be talking about that. But she's a very interesting person who's written a great deal of interesting material that's appeared on the internet and other places. And Heather, welcome very, very much to conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's so good. We say because we've been in touch by email over the years and so forth, and it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe you could share with us in the audience your own personal background, born and raised a little bit, education, and then we'll get into a discussion about world blogging, the political realities of the world now, the way you see it, and so forth. But share your own personal background, if you would, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was born in California, but actually I was raised a little bit in Europe, and I joined the Peace Corps,
Oh, really?
the U.S.
Okay.
Peace Corps.
Yeah.
In '85, I was based in the Philippines, and that's when the People Power Revolution happened.
Right.
And so for me, that was the beginning of my own, understanding of political activism in motion.
Had you done university work and so forth?
Yeah, I have a master's in clinical psychology.
You had that before you were in Peace Corps?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
that's
in
right.
in clinical psychology done where? Where did you work?
Berkeley.
At Berkeley, good school.
Yeah.
And what year were you able to take that, if I may? Or did you-
84.
That was in 84.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I joined the Peace Corps, 85, the People Power Revolution.
Uh-huh.
And then right after that, I moved to Tokyo. And I
Right.
lived there for 12 years doing
right.
a very long time.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
no.
And then I came back to the States for a short time, and
Uh-huh.
then I moved to Europe. My husband is from Austria.
Right, okay.
And so for me, what has been interesting,
Right.
going for all of these different countries and all of these different experiences,
Sure.
is to learn what works in a country and
Okay.
what doesn't work. And
Okay.
every time I come back home to the States,
Mhm.
it's really interesting to compare, and especially now coming back, everything is healthcare.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've lived in countries that have different healthcare systems, for
Sure.
example.
Uh-huh.
And so I know what works, and I know what people here are being told is not true. And it makes me crazy hearing about it. This is just one example.
On that big, very big, huge issue that's on Mr. Obama's agenda, the health care, because I guess we're the only industrial country in the world that doesn't have a unified health care service for everybody. And it makes us stand out, it seems to me, in the world.
It also makes us stand out. The World Health Organization in 2000
Right.
did a review of 191 countries and ranked them on the basis of, healthcare. Who has access to healthcare and what kind of healthcare is it? Austria was number 9. Japan was number 10. Where do you think the States was?
I don't even want to ask, out of how many countries? How many countries?
Out of 191.
I thought there were 192, but okay. I want you to tell us. Where was the United States?
37.
37th.
Yeah,
That's
and
the
we
greatest
spend
economy in the
more
world. Yeah,
on
more.
healthcare than other countries.
Yeah.
37. I mean, that's not anything to be proud of.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah.
For example,
And that's measuring not results and living how do they come? The data's accurate reflection of the reality?
absolutely accurate reflection, at least in the year 2000. I think things have probably gotten worse since then.
I would think maybe, in comparison particularly, yeah.
Yeah. Now, these days, on average, per person in the States, they spend $4,000 more per year than somebody in Europe. And somebody in Europe gets much better care. That's the thing. So it's no wonder that 70% of Americans are saying, hey, we want to talk about health care. But unfortunately, the things that really are working abroad are not even on the table here.
Okay.
And that's a problem.
That is interesting. That is. You're based in Europe after having been in Japan. I wonder if we could back up to clinical psychology.
Yeah,
you took your master's in clinical.
I did.
Only what did you do the bachelor's in?
UCSB, Santa Barbara.
No, but in what field? And where did you get
I'm sorry, in psychology. Psychology as well.
You were psychology all along.
Yeah, that's right.
There can be, you can be a lot of different things and be a psychologist all the way from B.F. Skinner to Rollo May.
There you go. Yes,
now, where would you be on that continuum? I mean, B.F. Skinner being very behavioralist and Rollo May and so forth being, I don't know, humanistic or something. Was there somebody in that way of understanding psychology, human mental process, that resonates with you, from a theoretical psychological understanding?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I would say more I'm just highly practical.
Practical, okay.
So
what works. Yeah, right.
I'm more interested now because I haven't actually gone into the field of psychology.
Right.
But
you did a master's in clinical psychology.
I did, but then I went into education.
Okay.
And so I'm more interested in applying psychology to other areas of life.
Right.
For example, either in political activism or in cross-cultural work, helping different cultures connect with each other. Yeah. Psychology is so broad that it really helps you expand to a bunch of different areas.
Well, it is. Everything is everything. We were talking about a grand guy, Buckminster Fuller. I guess we both admire.
Yes.
I think every thinking person does admire him among others and so forth. And you even got this idea of Gaia now, that John Lovelock and, I don't know, Rupert Sheldrake and that kind of thing are talking about Gaia, that it is really, we just did a program with astrophysicists that would have aired last a couple of days ago. The planet, it is all one system. It's all one system. We divide it down into academic disciplines for convenience. Fuller used to say, be a comprehensivist, try to see all the patterns connected. And it's really hard. There should be a department, I said to somebody, there should be a department at the University of everything.
Well,
and there isn't anything, but they're all interconnected. Economics, politics, psychology, physics, everything is connected. But we see it in tunnel vision too often, I think.
I agree with you, and I think the one question that really resonated with Buckminster Fuller, the whole idea of how can people live on Earth sustainably? Is that possible? And if it's possible, how do we do it? I think this question becomes more important every single year, because we see the system that we've been using politically and financially and certainly environmentally imploding. It's just not working anymore, and we need to think of new systems. So Buckminster Fuller, certainly we would need to have now. And another point of Buckminster Fuller I think is brilliant. I forget the exact quote, but he had a quote saying that societies are created actually by very ambitious people working behind the scenes, and they are invisible, and sometimes they don't do the right thing. And I would say nowadays, certainly, both in the healthcare debate and also in the financial meltdown, this is the situation that we've got.
When you say we do not have a system, are you referring to, let's say, the United States, or trilateral countries, or the world in general, humanity, when we don't have an appropriate system?
Well, that's a good point. I would say certainly in terms of healthcare, the we that I'm referring to is the United States. Primarily, you've got the Senate Finance Committee. You've got Baucus, the senator there, who has millions and millions and millions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies in the health industry. Charles Grassley, 23% of his funding comes from pharmaceutical companies in the health industry.
Pharmaceuticals are very big, but
you see, the thing is, then we can't really have an honest discussion of health care because these two men are controlling the debate. They have said there can be no single payer on the table, and that's not appropriate. I don't know if you remember, in May, you had 9 people who were arrested, medical personnel, who just stood up at the Senate Finance Committee and said, hey, we're doctors, and there's no one representing single payer here.
Right.
One by one, they were arrested.
Arrested for what? For upsetting a Senate hearing?
Baucus said, take them out, security, take them out one by one. They were moved,
They could have written that up if they got an editorial on the page of the New York Times. They could have written that up and they wouldn't have been arrested. It wasn't the idea. It was they were interrupting a hearing.
Yeah, but you know what? The democratic process wasn't working because that perspective wasn't even at the table. At a round table, it was only these corporate interests.
I saw Bill Maher the other day. He says, we don't have any representatives of real liberal persuasion. I mean, it's just, like that. And it seems Mr. Obama just skirts it. He said he understands there's a single player, but that we have a unique thing, and he's trying to reach out to a more coalition thing that would include some of the other people, let's say even the Republicans and so forth. So he's trying to reach out to something wider that would encompass other things other than just the pattern that the single payer does have, I guess. I don't know. He doesn't seem to be all, supporting that in whole cloth.
No, I mean, frankly, for me, many of the things that Obama does perpetuate the Bush system. I don't see a lot of change. There are small tinkerings going on. Now, mind you, I'm very grateful to have a president that can speak in full sentences.
Isn't it grand to have
this is lovely.
Yes.
He doesn't mispronounce words. This has meaning for me.
Right.
But at the same time, I do not see the level of change that we are needing on anything, on foreign policy, certainly not on economic issues.
Do you follow did you do much with economics and so forth in your history you have?
I have a lot.
Is there anyone in particular that again, I asked you about psychology, is it Skinner or Rollo May or whatever, something in between, or and then you could do in the economics, would you be a Schumpeter guy or gal, or would you be a Friedmanite? Would you be a Marxian? How would you line up in terms of the larger questions about economic theory that informs the political process? And do we have a right grounding that we put such attention upon the historical experience of the United States and the pattern that we've set up in this country as one that's good for the whole world? Or in terms of a broader context, do we need something new out of the canon? The accepted canon of economic theory by our economists that present to the political class?
Well, that's a very good question. I'd say number one, yes, we do need something new. A current economist that I have a lot of respect for is actually based in New York, Nouriel Roubini.
Who? Roubini, yeah, all right,
Because he basically says the truth, and the truth is not pretty, but it's true, and so we need to face these very
spell
gory
it out
facts.
a little bit. His view. He's at NYU, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. He's good. Yeah,
and basically, they called him Dr. Doom for years, and because he always said things are going to get worse, but they did. And so I respect a realist. When you turn on many of these financial news channels, they're always just trying to pump up the good feelings.
Sure.
And because they want people to
Politicians
keep buying.
want that for votes, too, and everything.
Yeah. And so as far as current economists, I would say that he is somebody that I respect, his viewpoint. But as far as the more philosophical point that
that's
you were
what
talking
I meant, really.
about,
Where does he fit in terms of prescriptions within the canon?
Well,
you could go all the way, like with Skinner, all the way to Rollo May. You can go all the way from, Marx to, Friedman, and call it economics,
And that's a very interesting question. For me, there's a guy named Sheldon Wallen.
Okay, that's
Sheldon
new.
Wallen.
I like new, right.
Yeah, and
where is he based?
I think he's based in California.
Okay.
He's been retired for years.
Weldon?
Wolin, W-O-L-I-N.
W-O-L-I-N.
He's written tons of books, but one is called Democracy Incorporated, and I think this applies to your question.
Thank you.
He talked about totalitarianism versus what he called inverted totalitarianism. And this inverted system means that actually corporations are kind of in charge, and the people are distracted by entertainment and things like this.
Yeah.
And economics rules politics.
Yeah,
This
I would
his
think
idea.
so. I would think so.
And frankly, I think this model really fits to what we've got going on now, not only in the United States, but in other countries.
Okay.
And for me, the interesting question is, when this model, what is it going to take to get this inverted totalitarianism to shift over to normal totalitarianism?
Okay, I'm trying to invert it. That's I got a picture of a cone standing on its head or something. Or
and so
what is it? I don't quite understand.
Instead of people rallying around some kind of charismatic leader, they're kind of just being led by, being distracted by entertainment or things like that. They're being led, but they don't know it, They're being led, again, by Buckminster Fuller's kind of invisible things going on. And so he had this model, and for me, this model really fits to what's going on nowadays. There are so many absolutely critical things going on. Again, they're reported in Europe. They're not reported here.
Really?
Let me
Okay.
give you one absolutely
you're based
mind-blowing
in Vienna or what?
Yeah, that's right. I'm
Yeah,
based in
okay,
Vienna.
yeah. It's an interesting listening point.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of a lot of
That's exactly
confluence.
right. Yeah. And I should say that I do a lot of consulting work with banks, and so I hear kind of the things that are going on and what they're talking about. Let me tell you something that terrifies me to my very soul. 2 weeks ago, there was a major meeting in Russia between Russia, India, China, Brazil, and some of the STAN countries.
Don't
like
they have a name for
Uzbekistan.
that group now?
BRIC.
Or something? BRIC. That's it.
B-R-I-C.
That's right. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And what this whole meeting was about was to solidify moving away from the dollar as the world reserve currency.
Toward?
Well, that was what the meeting was talking about. And of course, the U.S. wanted a seat at the table, and they said no. That hasn't happened before.
Yeah.
So what they decided is they're going to move towards the IMF. They're going to pump money into the IMF.
Right.
And into like a basket of currencies, of which
A
the
basket
U.S. is
of
one.
currencies,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Yeah, they call it drawing rights, special
Okay.
drawing
Yes.
rights.
Yeah.
Now, the implications for people in the United States,
Uh-huh.
of course, the people in New York, are mind-boggling. Because if the U.S. dollar is not the reserve currency anymore, and
Right.
it looks like this is going to happen
You think it
pretty
is
soon. Absolutely.
imminent or what?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
okay.
yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
are holding these dollars. But,
Yeah.
since the Bush administration came into office, the dollar has lost 33% of its value.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
And so they're looking at this thing and saying, we don't want more dollars.
That didn't include China. China holds so many of our T-bills and so forth now and
Yeah.
everything.
They
And
hold-
China is not included in
Oh,
that? or
they're
is China-
absolutely included.
They
in
are
this.
included in that group of nations, including Russia.
Absolutely.
And those others.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And they're thinking, there was a lot of talk about having things denominated in the euro. There was a lot of the sovereign funds, or the oil funds and so
Yes,
forth.
yes.
And that was a question. I don't know where it all stands now.
Where it all stands now is this meeting 2 weeks ago
Yeah.
that the States was excluded from.
It was in Russia. They were excluded. They asked to be invited and were excluded, even a representative.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're not
Yeah.
as big as they thought they were, perhaps, or something.
What do you mean?
We've been talking about a unipolar world. Remember, you're too young maybe to remember when we had a bipolar world. It was all Russia and the Kami, George Kennan, containment. We had that kind of thing, and then we had the Rimland and the Heartland and all of that. And we had Russia. We had a bipolar world of social communism, and then our free world, as we called it, that sort of thing. They imploded, the Soviet Union.
Actually, that very thing was mentioned at this meeting. The
Yeah.
Russian president gave a speech, and he said, now we're going to start a multipolar world.
Oh, okay.
So this very thing was mentioned 2
well,
weeks ago.
yeah, but
You
it
know.
used to be bipolar, very convenient. The United
Yeah.
States was the leader. Or coming out of the Second War, Europe was devastated and so forth, and we had all of that, and then they had a major. We came out of that very strong, and have been strong, and that's the people see it that way, unipolar almost. The United States, a lot of people had arrogance of power being that happens. Japan comes up now. China's coming, growing very rapidly, that sort of thing. So it's no longer unipolar as it has been. The United States been in the driver's seat since about the Second World War or before.
I think the main issue is maybe not that these other countries are coming up, it's that the U.S. has just spent so much money on the military, for example. I mean,
Right.
half of the discretionary spending of the U.S. is on the military.
Is it that high? It can't
Of the
be that high.
discretionary spending.
Of discretionary.
Spending,
Okay,
yeah.
that's beyond entitlements and
Yeah.
Social Security and everything, which is a lot. What is it about? What is the percentage of GDP which is military now?
Well, you see, how do you even know? Because
Yeah,
then
okay. That's
energy
interesting. Yeah.
has certain things. Health has,
Yeah.
weapons programs. And so there's so many programs that are hidden, But what's happening is China, for example, is buying the T-bills.
Right.
And then the U.S. is taking that money, building more military bases, for example, near China. And so these countries that have gotten together have said, hey, we're financing our own military action against us. We're going to stop that. That's one of the other reasons.
They've got military bases. Somebody told me they got military bases in something like, not just Marine guards at an embassy or something, but military presence in something like 110 countries or something around the world.
More than that.
And more than that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's only 192 in the whole world, so we got military bases everywhere. We surround the country of Iran.
And this costs a lot of money.
And it costs a lot of money, and it's of no use in a certain sense. It props up the... so we have that, but then we have maybe other structural problems in terms of this country. But we have been the light onto the world in a very real sense for a long time, and that seems to be dimming now.
Well,
Obama is probably still regarded as the most powerful man on earth. He's got a wide following and everything. There's a lot of political there. But Europe, I don't know. The United States is there. The people, trilateralists, are still in place. They still have the committee. They have the Council on Foreign Relations. They have the people who do the writing and informing of the world, and the governments and so forth. It's still the United States has a veto at the, that sort of thing. So there's still a major power, and they're still setting the template in many people's mind, but things are changing.
They still are, but when the dollar ceases to be the world reserve currency, when and if, but it looks like when, it's kind of the beginning of a new time.
What would we go to? The euro, or what would we go to? What would be the reserve currency? Or what would be the consequence of that?
For China and these large countries, what would be, again, is something called special drawing rights with the IMF, and it would be a basket of currencies that they would draw from. Oil most likely would be, chosen in the same area. For me, the interesting implications is what does that mean for the states?
Right.
Now, the value of the dollar would plummet, which means that it would be much more expensive to import things into the states, oil, for example. And of course, our industrial base is now abroad, and so we would have to
made
pay.
In China,
we would have to pay more money to get goods in. People are going to lose more jobs.
And we're not producing anything, so we haven't got anything to get more value for our buck, overseas. Yeah.
And so it makes the things that are happening now look like child's play compared to what could be happening. And so it's really important news, but I didn't see this reported over here. I mean, I read the U.S. media every day.
That was only a couple of weeks ago you're talking about.
It was 2 weeks ago.
Well, it only happened. It takes a little time to get the word out. It used to take 3 months in George Washington's time to get word to London. Things are going now.
And Michael Jackson, he's got time for
all
Russia.
That. Yeah, there is that. There's a fellow here who wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and that kind of thing, and that's a distraction because they don't want to see things. We were encouraged, I presume, by the election of Mr. Obama in this year after 8 years of Mr. Bush. It's been going that way. Do you see major changes coming in terms of the international view? He seems to have great popularity around the world. I don't know how he is perceived in Europe. You're there. Also, we just did programs with people in Africa. He just visited Ghana to great... he seems to be a very charismatic figure, certainly there. But how is he seen in Europe and the broader world, do you think, beyond Europe? And, and is it a beacon of light, or is there a possibility of some new change that there's been a great deal of upset with the pattern we've been taking recently, Guantanamo, torture, Abu Ghraib, a whole lot of other things that were outside the normal understanding of politics, even the most vicious realpolitik view of dog eat dog.
Well, I would say that people, at least in Europe, and I have many friends still in Asia, see him as the anti-Bush, and so he's perfect, and the media reports only good things about him. How many pictures I've seen of him and his cute dog, I can't tell you. But for me, what is bothering is that the true policies that he's pushing through, there isn't really in-depth analysis, but frankly, I don't see that so much in the United States either. It's
where do you see in-depth analysis that
I see this in the alternative online media.
Where? I mean, who? We have a star of the alternative multimedia. I don't pay a lot of attention myself to other than multimedia. I think the world's going that way and everything. We have a star named Amy Goodman.
Oh, of course.
Amy Goodman has really become a star in alternate media.
Yeah, Democracy
and she's
Now!
All over the place and very well supported and has a lot of things. She has a great Naomi Klein, Jerry May Scahill. She has always Noam Chomsky comes out. You could get some of the others. They're not very much seen. But the idea that there's what's called progressive. You wrote a book called the Progressives Handbook.
Yeah,
right?
I wrote 2 books called the Progressive. It's a series.
Okay, so a progressive. Could you tell me? You've written a book on it, so you best to be able to. What is a progressive? What does it mean to be a progressive? Does it have meaning? It's usually associated or synonymous with like liberal or left kind of thing. But what does it mean to be a progressive? And who are the leading lights in terms of giving an alternative that is truly comprehensive in terms of what the planet needs outside of our traditional canon? I don't know, some sort of Marxian, some sort of, we've gone with Schumpeter, we've gone with Van Hayek, we've gone with Friedman and so forth. So where is the underpinning, intellectual underpinning, that would give an alternative view that is progressive in a way that is comparable to what the existential challenge of the weapons destruction of our weapon systems that are now, I believe, I'm curious if you feel, our species lethal, that they exist now? What and where do we find leadership that goes, or intellectual leadership that informs an alternative view, positive view, for the condition in which the evolutionary process has arrived, led by Homo sapiens species? I mean, where do we find leadership, intellectual leadership, that has an existential meaning in terms of things at a comprehensive level?
Okay, well, that's a very interesting question. I think you mentioned one that I totally have a lot of respect for, and that's Noam Chomsky. His intellectual leadership comes from the fact that he is just honest. You know, he says things that are going on, and he can condense these incredibly complex ideas into something that is clear. I think that's the most important thing. You know, just anybody who kind of speaks the truth, you know, but there are a lot of...
Well, the truth is a many splendored thing.
Indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
it really is, yeah.
But the interesting thing online, I would say the number one source is just the internet, because you can look up and you can find, if you take the time, you can look up and you can find so much information there.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I don't know where the heck it came from. It's like a manna from heaven.
Came from the U.S. military. But with our tax dollars.
So, but that's not a philosophical grounding. I mean, he's very, very good. Mr. Chomsky is, I mean, in his field and that and everything, and he's a very good critic of the things that are wrong and the injustices that exist. Progressives are very often interested in that. But I'm talking about a large understanding that is going to be able to really, truly inform the entire political process in a major way,
I think that can be built from the ground up.
Or maybe it'll be something that'll just grow like out of the crowd or something.
This is why I'm mentioning the internet. When you get a bunch of people, you know, going to the internet, giving their opinion, being able to do research on matters that are important, then that creates its own philosophical basis.
You think it does? Like a synergy?
Indeed.
Synergy from the crowd, as it were?
The
crowd being the mass, the people, you know.
Yeah, and you've got people doing this internationally, and hey, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Well, this is my experience, you know. And so that is the philosophical base. It's a deeper level of communication. You can look at it this way.
Is, yeah.
Now, to return to the whole Obama question, for me, what I do is that when he says something, for example, we're going to shut down Guantanamo, the words come out, and then I look online to see, well, what is he really doing?
Yeah.
And usually what he's really doing is not that. You know, for example, Bagram is even worse than Guantanamo. Bagram in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They're adding extra rooms to Bagram. They're building more. And so he can say, okay, I'm going to shut this one, but we still have secret prisons. He has gone online being even worse than Bush in terms of habeas corpus. He has said that prisoners in, this is all, you can find it online, prisoners in Afghanistan have no rights. And he also said, this for me was my favorite, is that even if a foreign person has been acquitted of some kind of crime, he can have preventive detention of the person.
That's very worrying.
Is this our moral standing in the U.S.? I don't think so. You know, said he was going to pull out of Iraq, but then, you know, he and Hillary Clinton have just said, well, we could have 70,000 troops there until who knows how long. He's putting
You mean
more
in
money.
Afghanistan?
No, I mean in Iraq.
In Iraq. Okay, not to mention, what's he got, 30,000 up in Afghanistan now?
He's putting more.
Are we going to run out of soldiers pretty soon, or can we?
Well, we're running out of soldiers. We're running out of cash.
Yeah,
You know? How do we do this? How do we do both? And every buck that goes over there does not go into things like health care.
Right.
Over here. You know? And my last thing on this, he came out with this big thing, this pay-go thing, that Congress, for every dollar that it spends,
you're going to have to
has to
account
cut
for
a dollar elsewhere.
Or has to make it accountable in budgetary terms.
Yeah, that's right. But you know what?
It's nice
military spending and bank bailouts are not included.
Oh,
so what does that mean? So I can take a dollar out of health care here and put it into there, but what good does that really do?
Right.
I'm not allowed to take money out of military spending. And so I see this as being dishonest, basically. And people hear the top of the story, but they don't understand that underneath, the policies pretty much look the same as a continuation of the Bush years.
Well, we've been here. I wonder if we could back off and get a larger view or something like that Bucky would have done in a way. Bucky, God bless him, he was a comprehensivist. He did become a bit political with Grunch of Giants and, a critical path. But on the whole, he was talking about the design revolution and that kind of thing, very ecologically minded and also comprehensive. I remember I did doctoral work in Bolivia. I came back on television. They had two people on television. One was Bucky Fuller and one was Marshall McLuhan within about a week. And both of them talking to the audience on public television said, dare to be a comprehensivist rather than a specialist. Academia's gallop towards specialization. The pattern is set by a certain group and that sort of thing. But if you begin to we just talked to an astrophysicist here, put things in perspective. We're in this universe, and 3.7 billion years has been here since the Big Bang, 5 billion years since the planet, evolution. And we get to a point where we have all this capability unique to extend consciousness or, capability through tools or technology unique to us. In a way that gives us a new reflective state of consciousness. It appeared apparently about 200,000 years ago. So we got about 10,000 generations we've been here. And have we arrived at a moment at that level of thinking of qualitative transformation along an evolutionary line that in evolution they call punctuated equilibrium, where you get to a point where there's quantitative change and like a birth there is a new appearance of species? And are we at a point where that capability, extended technology, much of which goes to weapon systems so one tribe can get stronger than the other, steal the grain, grow at the expense of the other, and so forth, all the zero sum of history, where those weapon systems are now species lethal? I believe it is the case. I'm not sure, doing a lot of modeling, but if the weapons were to be unleashed in a spasm of hatred like Barbara Truckman's 1917 and unexpected consequences and everything, including unleashing those of the United States of America, which are awesome. Weapons we probably don't even know. I do believe it's true now that we've reached a point in that evolutionary process where it would mean the end of the Homo sapiens species. Do you think that's possibly correct?
Actually, let me give you a really interesting
If you've got a chapter
example.
and verse and modeling on that, I would like to have it into there.
Well, actually, one of the chapters in my book is called U.S. Weapons of Mass Destruction.
Okay.
And it talks about the hundreds, the billions of dollars that the U.S. has invested in chemical, biological, nuclear
biological,
weapons.
particularly germ. They got wave weapons, I think, now.
They do. Well, let me tell you something really interesting that happened in just last February. 3 fascinating things happened. One was Baxter, which is a huge U.S. pharmaceutical company. They have a subsidiary in Vienna, pretty close to where I live.
Right.
And it turns out, they're funded by the U.S. military and things like this. Turns out they combined 2 flu viruses that you're not supposed to combine because it could turn into a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, look at how much trouble we had with the swine flu. They didn't have a vaccine. It's very worrying.
No, hang on.
Remember 1918.
But hang on, these things are connected in a way. Again, the way the Buckminster Fuller would says, the picture gets even scarier when you look at it. They sent these connected things to 3 laboratories, one in Germany, Czech Republic, Slovenia, and they didn't even tell people in the laboratories that what they were getting was something that could cause a pandemic. And the people there injected the animals, whatever, and they said the animals died. And Baxter denied that they had combined these, Weeks later, they were forced to admit, we made a mistake. We don't know how they were combined.
Like Mockingbird did in Vietnam.
But so that was the first thing that happened in February. The second was just in New Jersey. 2 mice that had been, again, a U.S. military research lab, 2 mice that had been injected with the bubonic plague were missing. In New Jersey.
Out running through the meadow.
Well, I'm assuming they had died, but the carcasses were missing. They were supposed to be incinerated. That's not good. And then over at Fort Derrick, Maryland, this was all in February, they had to stop production in that weapons lab because it turned out that some of the samples were missing. Well, in June, I checked 9,000 vials of deadly toxins were missing from Fort Derrick, Maryland, in this research lab.
Very bad.
9,000 vials.
Okay, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing, you mentioned the swine flu, so we've got all of
Well, we
these.
didn't have a vaccine for it, you know.
Well, but the interesting thing is you've got the swine flu.
It takes you
now,
20 years to get a polio vaccine or something.
who is responsible to create the vaccine?
Yeah, the point being is...
No, but hang on just a second.
Go
the
ahead.
point is, it's Baxter in Vienna.
Okay.
The same ones that did this, you know.
Let me go off on another tack. I understand what you're saying. I appreciate it. It's really interesting and everything. But I had a friend of mine. He did Mark Stallman. He's a friend. He's an investment banker, and he took AOL public way back when they went. And his dad was a real scholar, and his dad was a real intellectual, better than a scholar even. He was an intellectual. He was in the room with about 12 guys in about 1948 when they coined the term cyber. They came up with that. And he used to say information overload. That is, information, they're talking cyber, and that's where we're going. Information overload permits pattern recognition. So what you're talking about is there's information overload, and every day there's a new thing comes over the transom. Revolutionary thing comes over the transom from all the different disciplines. But what we don't have is overview, and he said it permits pattern recognition. So the pattern recognition is what we need, and that's what we discourage within our specializing educational thing, where everybody gets strung out on particular radii that they can't relate. So the pattern I was asking is, if I was on that, is it possible? What evidence do you do? What's the modeling? Where can we get it? Are the weapons now species lethal? We know they were not species lethal as recently as 1945. We were trying as hard as we could, full tilt boogie, with all of our capability to kill each other, firebombing and so forth, and we were not. And the pattern is, does an existential new reality harbinge in itself from the realm of destruction, extended technology, or not? And if so, when was it? Most of the modeling seems to be that we reached that point about 1970. That the weapons became species lethal. That is, if they were unleashed in capability, not inflection points of theory, but unleashed, that about 1970 something new occurred on this planet in the universe. It was that we now had the ability to wipe out the entire hominoid Homo sapien. Do you think that's possible, the truth? And that is the reality at a level of capability?
Yeah,
an existential new reality in the universe. You could wipe out not just the next tribe and win or something, and it's zero sum, but it was something new at about 1970
well,
in terms of the destructive
look at how many nuclear weapons we've got going on.
Well, they say we're cutting down.
Like this.
No, I'm just wondering. No, I don't. Well, I want a yes or no answer, please.
Well, yeah.
Do you think it is the case? Do we have modeling for that? Do you have any modeling you could send me that would help verify that existential reality?
I think if you just look at the budget for biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons that we've got going on here. And if you look at the lack of oversight, and if you look at the goofy mistakes,
like those vials,
for example, you know,
but that's
then
part of
in
the
and of itself, you know, it speaks to this.
That's part of the detail.
Yeah.
That's part of the detail of the pattern. What we want is a pattern,
for me,
and then you want to put that pattern in a larger pattern, the evolution of universal consciousness, or the universal of processes. Evolutionary process in this part of the universe. For
me, the pattern is the same in healthcare, it's the same in the financial breakdown, and it's the same in this. For me, what I do is I look at the top surface of the problem, and then I ask two questions. Who's making cash off it? And who can it hurt?
Well, that would be
because
a way
that
to do it.
usually kind of takes you to where you're going. Now, in the case of this whole swine flu,
but that's always been the case.
It's always been the case.
No, throughout all of human history, you have a few group who run everything. Everybody else wallowing around in the mud.
This is what Buckminster Fuller said.
Well, that's true.
You look, who are the invisible people that Buckminster
Fuller
Fuller
what I'm trying to tell you is that's history. That's a pattern we understand. That's going into details. Or who's the guy that's who's a problem? Who's the problem? Who's the bad guy? Who's the bad guy that's doing it? Who's doing it? You know, that kind of thing. What I'm looking for is patterns.
Well,
and if we get a pattern where you can get destruction at that level, species level, really existentially significant, then one would ask in a pattern kind of way, what is the averse side, if there's yin-yang, universe, and so forth, on the positive side, transformation in terms of capability of the Homo sapiens species and so forth within the evolutionary process that would be equally existentially significant to an alteration in what James Joyce called history, a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. Is there something equally existentially challenging to the inherited paradigms or canon or whatever, or the story of human existence, that is equally on the living side.
That's
One
people.
contention is about the same time that Bucky Fuller projected that we had reached a point where there were more haves and have-nots at the level of capability for the first time coming out of history about 1970. That was the period of that gestation or something. Does that make sense to you? Have you seen those charts? Does that make sense?
I would
that we
say,
have, in a certain sense, then transcended scarcity for the first time around the year 1970 in terms of the level of capability, which has not been characteristic of the nightmare of injustice that we're coming out of in historical terms.
Now you've mentioned
Does any of that make sense?
It does make sense, but
Okay.
you've mentioned 1970 a number of times, and
Yeah.
for me this rings back something that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember, but in 1970 there was also a scare with swine flu.
I
Now,
don't remember that then.
It wasn't
Swine flu?
in the
It
U.S.
was called something else?
It was called swine flu.
It was,
wasn't
really?
this strain.
Not one
It
strain.
was swine flu.
Okay,
And
uh-huh.
so what the government did is they got a vaccine and they just vaccinated a bunch of people right away.
Very often
Well,
it takes a long time to develop
yeah,
a
this
vaccine.
vaccine
It can be off and
led
running, yeah.
to neurological disorders.
Okay.
And so a lot of the people that got this vaccine, of course, got extremely ill. Now,
Yeah.
for me, what's interesting, Einstein says that
Yeah.
the definition of insanity is
Doing
making a
the same
mistake
thing
and
over- yeah.
repeating it,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
What
yeah.
are we doing now? You got Baxter in Vienna and other
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals
Yeah,
that have
right.
been paid money to do this.
Yeah.
The UK has already ordered 90 million doses of this new vaccine. They're going to pass it within 5 days.
Really? Of
And
this
they-
date that we're talking on the 16th of July?
They're
2 days
planning to
after
get it in
Bastille Day?
September.
Yeah.
They're planning to get it in September.
Okay.
And
So it's
the
even-
first
yeah.
inoculated are going to be school kids, you know, because it applies to kids. Now, for me, the question, okay, who's making cash off this?
Okay, you
Who's
think
making
that's it.
cash
So
off
it brings
this
it back to
hysteria?
economics, right? Okay.
It also brings me back Adrian Gibbs, who is
Adrian Gibbs,
he's a preeminent scientist. He
Thank
was one
you.
of the people who invented Tamiflu.
Okay.
You know,
Uh-huh.
by the way, Rumsfeld had a lot of stock in Tamiflu, which
Okay.
was quite interesting.
Okay.
He examined this current strain of swine flu,
Right.
and he came out with a scientific report saying he thought it originated in a lab. This is not something that looked like it just kind of came up.
Uh-huh.
Which brings us back to
Right.
the whole biological weapons
Okay.
research thing that's
Right.
going on.
Yeah.
And so for me,
Right.
you know, is the very funding of this kind of program
Right.
is putting us in danger.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we are in existential danger. You know, those are details.
But it's
of
a
the pattern.
reality, man.
No, it is a reality.
You get an
Okay,
injection in
yeah,
your arm, that's
yeah,
reality.
Absolutely, and very often, like woolly-headed thinking of idealism or thinking about big things like James Joyce commenting and that kind of thing, and people that are, Fuller, for that matter, even thinking about these things that aren't good, hard, realpolitik reality. Reality is very often only a projection of tunnel vision by people who are not thinking about things in a comprehensive way.
Or they're not getting information.
Is it possible that they're all arguing, the canon, we only let Galileo off the hook about 12 years ago and we weren't looking at all the research on the orbit pathways of Jupiter, which made the details of what he was doing, but the pattern. The pattern was we were not the center of the universe, which messed with people's identity because it was a big change intellectually. So we only let them, the Catholic Church only let them off the hook. These things died long. It takes a long time for these things to die. The question is, do you think it's possible that in terms of the evolutionary process that we may have at a level of capability with elegance of design, all of the Fuller things, carbon-60 is coming, nanotechnology is coming, that we have transcended at a level of capability. There are more haves and have-nots of the human society and the ecology for the first time in history, which has not been characteristic of 200,000 years of history, has been zero-sum. Not enough. Scarcity. The basic premise of economics, the basic premise that informs the political process. If I gain, you have to lose, that kind of thing. And that was characteristic at the level even of capability. We were impotent to be doing something like that. Do you think maybe that we live at a time where there's been a qualitative change at the level of capability that because everyone's caught up with it, and reifying outdated canons and institutions and television. FBI won't talk to the CIA won't, that kind of thing, and intellectuals doing that, all splintered and so forth, that they're overlooking the big paradigm of paradigm shifts that's going on. We have transcended material scarcity at the level of capability. That's a pattern that would be characterizing. Then, if that's the case, what new possibilities might there be that could be introduced into the dialogue about how we're going to go about organizing the world in terms of the institutions by which we're going to interrelate within that kind of an understanding? And if that's the case, why is it never mentioned?
Well, that dialogue happened 2 weeks ago in Russia.
Oh.
The world system is changing.
Okay.
And the bottom line...
You think it's that big?
I know it's that big.
Did they talk about anything along those lines?
Well, they can't say
they
things
don't. Why? Why couldn't they? Why couldn't someone? Why couldn't intellectuals? They're not tied like tethered goats to a thing like
they're
something.
Political leaders.
Well, they're political. Okay, then the political system is not being able to be given vision in terms of the way in which...
No, it's just practicality. They still own a lot of dollars, and they don't want the dollar market to crash. So they're quietly
just
divesting.
Like always
they're quietly divesting.
Okay, that's
right
like
now.
They want dollars, they want to make money, they want to have power, the way all the political leaders have from Rome and through the, through all of human history.
They want to get rid of their dollars
people,
quietly.
Yeah, but that's a detail
crash.
Of the fact that you have a leadership pattern, like with all of history, and that they're not considering there's a transformation that's taking place, only seen from a pattern. That is not. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but my thing is there is a very huge transformation going on here, and that is that the U.S. is losing its imperial status.
Okay, so it is. If it is, it is. It isn't. Are you optimistic for the human prospect?
Am I optimistic for the human prospect? That's a very good question. I think times are going to get much harder before they get better. And I think that we are on a kind of suicidal path, I can put it that way. I mean, even...
We have the capability to do it in big time now,
but,
don't we?
But even here, everybody's drinking out of plastic bottles, eating out of plastic things. This is not sustainable. You have Spaceship Earth, Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah.
This is not sustainable.
Right.
This is not a sustainable way of life. And so I think that the environmental factors could get us before the weapons do. You
do.
I mean,
environmental factors like warming.
For example, you've got a lot of people with deforestation. They have no food. You've got riots in China because people don't have air that they can breathe. They don't have food.
Have you been there, China? Yeah.
Yeah.
Beijing is really polluted, and the people out in the back, there's 80,000 demonstrations that are trying to be put down. They don't even know Tiananmen Tank Man.
Things like
that. I mean, they've really got to think. Yeah, so you've got a group that's controlling things.
Well, so my point is
and
the world is facing...
Where are the visionaries? Where are the visionaries that are seeing things? That's what I'm saying, that are thinking about the whole thing, rather than these isolated political things where they're still talking in terms of the traditional canon by which the powerful have ruled the various countries and so forth of the world. Where is somebody taking a comprehensive overview of what's going on? And who do we have, like Fuller was?
But you see, my point is that the
visionaries
that we have are actually people who don't have big names, who are connecting online and just communicating. I think the visionary network, if you will, the overview,
that's good,
can come from below.
Okay.
We aren't looking for the totalitarian view, if you will go with the Wallen. It's coming from underneath.
You think it is?
Kind of,
okay.
I think it is. Now, I'll tell you my fear. I'll tell you my great fear is that if I hope, but I think actually when, it does really get harder in the United States, when the dollar does crash and things get worse. I think, you're going to have uprisings in the street, you're going to have people really angry, and during times like this, what people tend to do is veer, it's like, Germany in the 1930s, people tend to veer towards very strong leaders, toward, models of fascism, if you will. It was very interesting. Last November, the U.S. Army War College released a report called Known Unknowns, and it talked about using the U.S. military for domestic uprisings in case of an economic crash here.
Posse comitatus
there you go.
Throw it out the window along with everything else.
So this is my fear. My fear is that you've got people communicating, but if things crash, then they, en masse might veer towards some kind of charismatic, right-wing hatred leader.
Well, it's going to crash if they don't come up with something economic, and they just reported, just Krugman even wrote the other day, and he said it's going to be, if we're going to do it, we're going to have a jobless. We're going to have a jobless recovery.
And how do you have a jobless recovery?
And you have only, and the whole economic canon is all you're going to distribute income to the masses.
Yeah, but it's not distributing income to, it's a wealth, what we are witnessing now is a disgraceful wealth transfer from the U.S. taxpayer to corporations. Now, this money is not going to come back to the U.S. taxpayer.
Well, the point is you're going to have but the thing is, so at the level of economic theory, who is it that we're going to be? They said, Mr. Nixon one time said we're all Keynesian now. We're going to go back to Keynes. Maybe some things. He said you're going to have, from 1930, projected for this time, massive, technologically induced, massive unemployment as the productive capability that does not need human labor. And all of our economic theory is predicated upon a view of the input of the labor theory of value, essentially, that you contribute by your labor and you get income. Masses of the people get income from their labor in a process that's going to be putting labor's contribution to production in the shade. And we don't have an alternative way of distributing demand. We don't have demand to clear the market, what can be produced by technological instruments, all owned by a tiny plutocratic class. We need a new economic theory. It's not Marx. It's not Chomsky. It's not anti-Friedman like Naomi Klein. It's some sort of an alternate economic theory that would inform the political process, and we don't seem to have it, or do we? I mean, coming out of the mass, do you see that? Or do you just see people talking and reifying old institutions, old thoughts, Trotskyites and all the rest? They come out with all the old ideas, and the new ideas aren't emerging, and they're not addressing them in a pattern way, which is needed. That's what I'm saying.
For me, the pattern that I see is the same pattern. I look at the problem, and then I look who's making cash off it.
Okay.
And the pattern that comes up again and again and again, you know, the oil bubble, the technology bubble, now this bank bailout, the housing bubble.
Yeah, it's economics.
And next is cap and trade. The question is who's making cash off it?
Okay.
You know, and the bottom line is there is a small group making a ton of money. They need bubbles.
Always.
They need bubbles. And if there's no bubble,
it's always been like
there's
that.
your pattern, my dear.
It's coming out of history.
Pattern.
You had emperors in Rome.
Yeah.
You had the aristos in Europe. You had that. You had, you know, that kind of thing. Now you got bankers and people that are on the top, the people that own all the assets, some sovereign funds and that kind of stuff. And there's a few people who run everything.
You got
That's
Goldman
the way it's
Sachs,
been out of all of
history. You got AIG, and you've got
AIG?
Obama's team. Obama's financial team is
So
alumni of Goldman Sachs and
Okay,
AIG,
fine. Okay.
and they're giving themselves cash.
Okay, they are, and they're doing that, and they're not letting them go. So people are saying that who are we all now at the level of economic theory? Who is informing Mr. Obama in terms of economic policy, the breakdown of the whole world economic order and so forth? We have larger patterns that are at play. Mr. Keynes saying you're going to have displacement of labor. You distribute income to the folks through their labor. It's like a wage slave thing that you have in all the world. You have a few people who own everything. They run everything. Everybody's walking around like slaves, serfs on a feudal estate. It's all owned by a tiny group, okay? Mm-hmm. And they have a tremendous capability. You're not going to need the wage slaves, traditionally. They have no stake in what's actually producing the wealth. The labor theory of value informs all economic theory, including Friedman, Marx, Trotsky, everything. And it's not being questioned at all.
You got 1.5 million homes going up for foreclosure right now.
Okay.
And in May, you've got Congress couldn't even agree on something that would protect people, you know, in court to be able to, you know, reevaluate their loans.
Those are symptoms of dysfunction. We have symptoms of dysfunction, and the symptoms of dysfunction. Mm-hmm. Now, the point is, they're not going to be able to get it by just talking about who is it that is informing the political class in terms of economic theory?
Who is the political class?
The political class are the presidents and the congresses of the various nations of the world, including the international order. Largely, Mr. Obama is very, very influential. He's advised by Mr. Krugman and the intellectuals.
He's advised by Paulson. He's advised
and
by
Geithner and Volcker and the traditional one. Okay.
Goldman Sachs.
And then who on this court? So you've got others. who is got a vision of what is needed outside of just the argument about who's to blame.
But how
That's
do you
what
define,
I'm saying. Where is the
how do you
leadership,
define
intellectual
what
leadership?
is needed? Because the people who are advising them are advising them what is needed for Goldman Sachs
Of
and
course.
these large corporations.
Now, what about the question?
Now, the question
okay,
of the people.
Yeah. Okay,
Who
they
is
would.
advising them of what is needed for the people?
Yeah.
Well, to go back, somebody who advocated a single-payer health care was not even allowed at the table.
Well, the
For the Senate, Finance Committee.
That relates to health
they
care.
are not being able. So the voice of the people is being excluded.
You think a single-player thing would be a thing?
Single-payer?
There's a lot of people want that. Ralph Nader's a voice you hear from once in a while.
60% of doctors want that.
But
my point is that the voice of the people needs to be heard.
You think the people have collectively the answer? Is that what you're saying?
I think that the conversation needs to expand beyond corporate interests in so many areas.
Shall we do away with the corporation? Shall we do away with the private sector? Shall we do away with private property? Shall we have a socialist, a lot of Marxists will want to do away with that's inappropriate, that kind of thing. We're going to have something that's so comprehensively appropriate that it'd be liberating of people and the ecology. And the trickiest part, from a progressive, radical progressive, not just latte progressive, but real radical progressive, is to present an alternative that's so comprehensively appropriate to the broader pattern that it'll be able to be liberating of the people, as is necessary if we're going to get to that trans-scarcity condition, and the ecology, but in the end will have to be so comprehensively appropriate that it'll be able to be understood by, call them the Illuminati, or the people who are at the top, getting all that profit, looking out for themselves narrowly, tunnel vision. They need vision. They'll be able to understand it and go along with it and include them in a pattern that's going to be including everybody else, a comprehensive pattern. Where is that coming from? That's what we need, and we don't have it.
I think if people take the political personally, if they understand that the money spent on weapon systems is going away from their own health care, if they understand that the money that is being spent on the military, for example, in other countries doing torture in Bagram or whatever, is taking away from their kids' education, when you take the political personally, that's a wonderful start.
Okay, well, that's a start. And there might be hope in the fact that something's going to be coming out of the mass of the people, but it's going to be very confusing when they don't have a system in place. And it's also the progressive. You wrote a book called The Progressive.
Progressives
So
Handbook.
the progressive is very good at identifying the enemy. It'll be the corporations, private sector.
I think that's too simplistic. I think that's too simplistic. No.
Yeah, but you understand what I mean.
I understand what you're saying, but
I mean, they're very good at identifying the
the
inequities and the inappropriateness of what's in order. They're not very good in coming up with an alternative. We don't need an alternative. We're just going to stumble into it. Or
no,
something coming out of...
Of course not.
No, that's what I'm wondering.
No, of course not.
Okay.
You know, the whole point is to expand the conversation. For example, you've got $700 billion going from the U.S. taxpayer to these bank bailouts, but not one U.S. taxpayer, a normal person, is on the board of these banks. The banks aren't being nationalized.
No, but they have to be included. We can't just isolate the private sector guys, the Illuminati, whoever's running things. They're going to have to be included. You have to have... That's bipartisan. It can't be singular and just get rid of somebody who's the enemy and then think you've solved the problem.
It's not the
you
enemy.
Include everybody.
There's no such
thing as the enemy. No, but it is in many
enemy.
people's mind. In political terms, it is.
It's a system that's dysfunctional, and the system needs to change. There's not enemies in this.
There are in people's thinking.
But you can
in people's
identify
thinking,
where the problem is, and then you can say, well, where